Hello, students, and welcome back as we begin a brand new chapter on the age of absolutism. So, following the Reformation and the Peace of Augsburg that effectively allowed German princes to choose their own religions, as well as the Reformation Parliament in England and the Act of Supremacy that essentially moved England away from the Catholic Church, we end up with an opportunity for monarchs to essentially solidify their own power and become absolute. So please title your notes for today, Emergence of Modern States. Another quick important thing to note, following the Renaissance and the renewed interest in artwork and in school, people also have more of a need for monarchs than they did previously. Like, if you think back to the Middle Ages, the idea of a monarch was an abstract concept. Average people really relied on their local lords for most day to day tasks, and the idea of a king was one that was very far removed from everyday life. But now, with a need for school, with a need for education, a need for a strong military to protect you, there is much more need to have this strong, unified ruler. Let's take a look at King Louis XIV, who is probably the quintessential example of an absolute monarch. Just looking at him, you can see his pose as he's, standing, looking very powerful and stern. Perhaps not to a modern audience, but this would have been perceived as like a pinnacle of masculinity, showing off his legs and his frame. You can see the extravagant attire that he's wearing, the extravagant wig, the extravagant background, all demonstrating his wealth and unparalleled authority. So, just to kick us off, let's define absolutism and what this type of government structure really is like. So, an absolute monarchy is really a government where one single individual, one ruler, controls all aspects of society. Everything revolves around one person. This person claims to have what's called divine right, hearkening back to the mandate of heaven we talked about earlier in the year in ancient China. But essentially, the idea is that the king or queen has been given the authority to rule by God himself. So he's not given the ability to rule through their people or a constitution or a government or a document, but literally through the divine. And monarchs don't answer to their own subjects, they actually answer to God. So, this is like a metaphysical way of explaining where their authority or their legitimacy is coming from. So, taking a look back at the feudal system, which you can see pictured there in the chart to the right hand side of the screen, before this, there were many people included in feudal society, but most notably nobles. Up until this point, Europe was composed of many fractured states, as we talked about earlier, the manorial system, the feudal system. But it was really powerful families and the nobility that were really running the show and pulling the strings in people's everyday lives. They were very much hesitant to give power to a single person or a monarch in fear that that monarch would then take power away from them. So, kind of bringing us back to the Reformation, Charles V, who was the Holy Roman Emperor, inherited Spain. Think back to his royal lineage to Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand. And he also, as a result, acquires Spain's colonies in the Americas as a result. So, following the Reformation and the Peace of Augsburg, Charles V essentially retires, and he divides his empire into two segments. The Holy Roman Empire goes to his brother Ferdinand, and Spain goes to his son Philip II. So you may remember Philip a bit from our lesson on Tudor England and his relation to the Tudor rulers. But essentially, he's also going to seize Portugal after the King of Portugal had died, and he marries Mary the First of England. He tries to control England from his throne in Spain, but it proves to be a bit difficult. In 1600s, the American mines in the New World are producing tons of gold. Spain is becoming extremely profitable after the Treaty of Tordesillas. The Spanish are able to explore heavily in the West, and they're making a lot of money. What do they do with this newfound capital? They finance a massive navy and a massive army, essentially to continue with their conquests in the name of Christianity. So the marriage between Philip II and Mary I does not end well. Mary is unable to get pregnant. And she has like a false pregnancy where they believe that she's pregnant. It's unclear if she was trying to fool Philip II or she really was fooled herself. False pregnancies are a very rare thing that could potentially happen. Once Philip II realizes that Mary is not going to produce an heir, he returns to Spain to rule from there and continue to build up his military, Mary ultimately dying from disease. He does propose to Elizabeth I, Mary's sister. She turns him down because of religious differences. Elizabeth is a Protestant, Philip II is a devout Catholic, and essentially he declares war on England as a result. So Philip hated Protestants. He also hates Muslims as well, which leads to numerous conflicts in the Ottoman Empire too. He's extremely devoutly Catholic, just like his parents were. And Philip II is going to launch an attack, a full frontal assault on England. The issue is strategically, England is very difficult to take by the seas because it's an island, and the English invest heavily in their navy. A massive storm hits the Navy as it's approaching, and despite being the strongest Navy in the world, it gets absolutely demolished in the English Channel. Philip II had invested the entire Spanish economy in the Navy, so once it's destroyed, it causes crippling inflation, which ultimately sinks the Spanish economy and really ends Spanish dominance in the world at the time and leads to the English becoming really the most powerful empire to be emerging at this point in time. Also, the English have their 13 colonies in the New World. We'll talk about this shortly, but they'll also engage in the French and Indian War against the French to take their possessions in the New World as well. So the English are making a lot of money on their colonial possessions and their imperialistic interests globally. So, just as a very quick note, because we'll visit Sir Francis Drake later on, he's the second person to circumnavigate the globe after Ferdinand Magellan and the first to actually survive the voyage. During the attack of the Spanish Armada, he was the vice admiral, and following this, he gets awarded knighthood by Queen Elizabeth I. He's one of the most famous sailors of all time, and we'll be talking about him a little bit more in some future lessons. Just to show you very quickly, this map demonstrates the actual attack of the Spanish on England. You can see how they attempted to circle the island and take over, ultimately being destroyed in the English Channel by a massive storm that unfortunately just happened to hit them, weakening them to the point where the English were able to win the battle.